common nematoda would be Enterobius formicularis, also called the pinworm. It's estimated maybe 500 million people, or 500 million people worldwide, may be infected with Enterobius. Again, the numbers vary quite a bit because we don't have accurate reporting systems. Enterobius formicularis adults live most of their life cycle in the human intestine. The male and female worms are very tiny in comparison to other nematodes. The male is about 5 millimeters long, which is about 1/4 of an inch, and the females are about 10 millimeters long. That's roughly maybe 1/2 an inch. They produce thousands of eggs every day, roughly 10,000 a day on average, that are all fertilized, ready to keep going and continue the life cycle. And the eggs are fairly distinctive, so when we get a sample in the laboratory, if you see one fertilized Enterobius egg, then you can confirm the diagnosis that the patient has pinworm. Now, one of the unique things about Enterobius formicularis is how quickly the fertilized eggs can develop into infective juvenile larvae. It takes about 6 hours at roughly 37 degrees Celsius, which of course is human body temperature. The ideal development for the juveniles would be essentially in a fairly interesting and unique place in and on the human body. The Enterobius life cycle, or the human pinworm life cycle. Again, we need to look at the life cycle and determine what are the infective stages and what are the diagnostic stages, and some of the unique characteristics. Where should we start? Well, let's start at the top left. Humans are infected when they ingest the eggs containing juvenile larvae. Once they get into the intestinal tract, the eggs hatch. The little small juvenile larvae migrate out into the large intestine as they continue to mature into adult male and female worms. Eventually, the adult male and female worms mate, producing fertilized eggs, and the female has to crawl out of the anus and the female crawls out and deposits eggs, which have a very sticky surface, on the outside surface of the perianal area, the skin around the opening. Now, depositing these eggs, because their stickiness, because of the location, causes an irritation or inflammation. The area becomes itchy. It's not unusual to see young children tugging at their underwear or scooting on the floor trying to scratch their behind because of this perianal itch or inflammation. If they remain long enough, in other words, if the eggs remain attached long enough to the surface of the skin, these juvenile larvae will hatch out of the egg case and crawl back into that entry point to the lower intestine, continue to mature into adult male and female worms, and continue the cycle of the process all over again, becoming adult worms, females emerging, laying more eggs, and so it's constant, what we call retro-infection. The eggs are deposited, people get them on their hands because they're itching, it gets on their bedding, their clothing, even on any place that you've touched surfaces with hands that aren't clean, that might possibly have infective eggs or egg casings with the infected larvae in them, can be contaminated with these infected eggs. That's why if an Enterobius infection is determined, you have to make certain that all of those kinds of surfaces and materials are thoroughly disinfected and cleaned to prevent reinfection of the folks that are living with the Enterobius formicularis or human pinworm. So it's a constant vigilance of noting various symptoms as well as making sure good hygiene and sanitary practices are maintained to prevent reinfection with Enterobius vermicularis. Often we encourage everyone to keep washing their hands to prevent the transmission of viruses and bacteria. But we need to also understand that good hygiene or continuous hand washing appropriately after especially you've used the restroom also limits the spread of parasitic worms or any kind of parasite. The entire life cycle for Enterobius is in and around the human host. The females come out at night to lay their eggs around the perianal area. Once they're deposited, and of course in that process of essentially crawling
out of the perianal area and causing that itching, then it's important that children as well as adults keep their hands thoroughly washed, especially if they're doing any localized scratching or itching.
Here's a photo illustrating just how tiny the adult Enterobius is. The female comes out at night, about an hour or two after a person has laid down for their evening sleep or rest. If you shine a flashlight on that affected area, you'll see that the worms, because they are translucent, will appear to glow in the dark, or appear to glow in the bright light of the flashlight as the light is refracted through the little bodies of these adult worms. To collect a specimen for evaluation to determine if someone has pinworm or Enterobius, the specimen is collected using sticky, clear Scotch tape or some kind of adhesive tape. It's actually called the Graham sticky tape method. For the individual who first discovered, this was a fairly simple, sort of straightforward way
of collecting a sample from the perianal area.
So the clear Scotch tape method is a fairly straightforward, simple way of collecting material from and around the perianal area and determining whether or not someone has Enterobius vermicularis. Notice that the two illustrations on these two separate slides, you'll have what's typically either a tongue blade or perhaps even a plastic paddle. You loop around with the sticky side out a piece of sticky, clear tape. You gently press the sticky surface to the perianal area and then unfold the tape, put it back onto the surface of either the clear plastic paddle, which is illustrated in the photo on the far right, or even if it's a wooden tongue blade. You would put the sticky surface back onto the tongue blade. That whole material is shipped to the laboratory. Then we take the tape, put it on a clear, clean microscope slide, and review the specimen collected, looking for a very classic sort of capital D-shaped, fertilized and animated or encased larvae or eggs of Enterobius vermicularis. You typically would collect these specimens if you have a patient who's displaying symptoms of inflammation or itching in or around the perianal area, and you'd need to repeat this 3 to 5 times to make sure that you've made every attempt to try and collect these specimens, because just one time might not be a clear-cut answer to explain why the patient is experiencing some of the symptoms that you observe or that their family have observed.